Hi, my name is Audrey Emrine Beardsley. I'm a professor at Arizona State University, and I'm the fortunate host of a show that we've created called Inside the Academy of Education. Today I'm speaking with and in admiration of Dr. Pedro Noguera. It is a pleasure to honor you.
Thank you. Great to be with you, Audrey.
Great. We're going to start with the first section of the show called Becoming Pedro. Tell us about your childhood in terms of where you were born, your parents, etc.
So I'm the second of six siblings. My parents are immigrants from the Caribbean, father from Trinidad and Venezuela, mother from Jamaica. I was born in New York City, grew up in Brooklyn, area called Brownsville. I always joke that it's the part of Brooklyn that still hasn't gentrified. And we eventually moved to Long Island, went to high school in a place called Brentwood. Brentwood got famous a few years ago for the MS-13, but ended up going to Brown University as an undergraduate and Berkeley for graduate school.
So when you were in New York, did you attend public school?
I had 1 year in Catholic school, but aside from that, I think that was second grade. Aside from that, it was all public school.
Okay, and what kind of student were you?
I was a good student. I was always conscientious. I was an avid reader, and I credit my parents with that. They used to make us go to the library on Saturdays after we did our chores, and so early on I became a lover of reading. And I think I attribute a lot of my academic success to that, the fact that I was a self-motivated reader.
And your parents had a lot to do with your love of education too, is that correct?
Yes, in that they believed in education. So, I mean, they sent all six of their kids to college, very good colleges, Harvard, Brown, Cornell, two at Berkeley, and neither of them graduated from high school, neither of my parents. So they believed in education, but they were not the kind of parents who were involved in our schools. They were not involved in our work. They just told us do our best and pretty much left it on us. So we had a lot of independence, but I would say a lot of encouragement to do well.
So 6 successful siblings from the family.
Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty impressive, all at very prestigious schools.
Right.
Right. What did you learn in your schooling, pre-K-12, let's just say, that you think that inspired the educational professor that you are now?
Well, I learned a lot of things. One of the things I think, and I wrote about this recently in an article about why integration matters still. And I was reflecting on my own experience having gone to schools that were more or less integrated, from at least from middle through high school. And no, actually even earlier. And I, a lot of what I learned is how to deal with obstacles, how to deal with racism, how to deal with white people. And I think that for kids of color who live in racially isolated communities, they don't get that experience. Then when they find themselves in an integrated setting, they often are at a loss. They don't have the confidence to navigate those spaces. And I got that early. So when I went to Brown, although it was an elite institution with very wealthy people, I felt I'd already learned how to deal with much more overtly racist people while I was in high school and middle school. So that was a piece of cake to me.
So when you went to Brown, this is for your undergraduate, what did you want to study?
So I wasn't sure at first. For a little while I thought I would be pre-med because I wanted to do something to help the world, but chemistry was an obstacle for me, and I decided, I took a psychology course my sophomore year, and one of the things we had to do was to work in a school. We had a practicum, and I was working in a kindergarten classroom as an assistant to the teacher, and my job was to work with kids that had behavior problems, which I thought was a joke, because how much of a problem could they be at 5? And I quickly realized the only problem they had was that they were restless and couldn't sit still. And I learned very early on that if you build strong relationships with kids, they'll do pretty much whatever you ask. And that got me hooked on education, and seeing education as powerful and influential, that early experience.
And then did you become a public school teacher?
So at Brown, I studied sociology, I studied history, I got my credential, and I started teaching in Providence, Rhode Island at Central High School. But I also got my master's when I was at Brown, and I had a mentor while I was there, Martin Martell, who really encouraged me to get my PhD in sociology. And he really strongly encouraged me to go to Berkeley. And so I followed his advice and headed to Berkeley. So I wasn't really in education at that point, even though I had a teaching background. And even though when I got to Berkeley, I worked as a substitute teacher in Oakland Public Schools while I was doing my graduate work. But I was doing that more because I needed to earn money and as a way to get to know the community, not because I saw that as my future.
And so those experiences in your life, how did those inspire who you have become, akin to the question before?
So they gave me insights into how to make a difference in education. I'll just give you one example. When I was teaching in Providence, I was teaching American history. And my mentor teacher basically told me, your job is to cover the textbook. Get the kids from the Revolutionary War in September to the Vietnam War in June. That's the job. And it was clear to me that he was not concerned with kids actually learned history. What he was concerned about was if I covered the material.
Okay.
And fortunately for me, he wasn't watching. So although I was only 21 years old, I had all the power. And I realized what I could do is use that power to get kids to love history, to care about history, because I loved history, which meant bringing history to life. And I would bring friends in from college and ask them to dress up as figures from history so my students could pose questions and interrogate them and have debates with my students over important questions of American history. And so I was hooked right away that teaching could be powerful, but not yet convinced that that should be my path in education.
So you got your PhD from Berkeley and you studied sociology?
I did, and my particular focus was on the Caribbean, political change in the Caribbean. I did research in Grenada, which some will recall had a revolution in 1979. I went down there in 1982 with my first wife, had my son there, and was studying the literacy campaign that took place in the country. I wanted to know how adults who had previously been marginalized because they were poor and illiterate, how they were being involved in the changes occurring in the country and what role education played in that. And so I spent a year there in 1982, and a few months later, the United States invaded Grenada, and so suddenly Grenada became important in a different way.
So you got your degree in sociology, but you were interested in education and the intersection of that as well, also for your dissertation in Grenada. So what was your first academic position after that?
A couple of things happened along the way.
Okay.
While I was a grad student, I ran for student body president at UC Berkeley.
Okay.
During the anti-apartheid movement and was elected. And I was very active in that anti-apartheid movement, and we successfully got the University of California to disinvest from companies that were doing business in South Africa, which was the largest disinvestment in the country at that time. And that was a protracted struggle that took place over several years. But then when I stopped being president, I got asked by the mayor of Berkeley to become her chief of staff. So I took a leave from my graduate work to go work for the mayor. And it was in that role of working with the mayor on all the complicated issues facing the city. At the time, we were dealing with the housing crisis and homelessness. We also were in the middle of a drug trafficking epidemic related to crack cocaine. I was in the middle of all of it, was very frustrated by the inability of the city to solve these problems, which brought me back to education, because I realized that the root of many of those problems was education, and we had to do a better job of educating kids. And so I started, while I was finishing my dissertation, I left the mayor's office, started teaching at an alternative high school, and became more and more interested in what role education could play in addressing some of the large, complex issues facing America.
So your first academic position, was that in education or sociology? Or?
It was in education. So what happened is I went on the job market when I was finishing. I got offers a few places. And then out of the blue, so I was approached by Berkeley, which I thought would never happen because Berkeley never hires its own
graduates.
But I got hired in education, not sociology.
Okay.
And they just created a new unit in something called social and cultural studies. And it was made up of, I call it all the oddballs who didn't fit anywhere else. The historians, the philosophers, the anthropologists were all together. So I worked with Jean Lave, an anthropologist, and Carol Stack, and we created this unit, Social and Cultural Studies. And it gave me a place from which to do the kind of work I wanted to do in urban education.
You went from misfits to interdisciplinary, which is totally what we want to be now.
Exactly.
That's an awesome experience. Okay, so then you served, and I don't know if this is the appropriate order, but faculty at Harvard, Columbia, NYU, and then UCLA.
So I was at Berkeley for 10 years as a professor, and then I got recruited and joined the faculty at the Graduate School of Education at Harvard. I stayed there for 3 years. Then I went to a visiting position at Teachers College before joining the faculty at NYU.
Okay, and where did you become an associate professor? That was at Berkeley?
At Berkeley.
And then a full professor was?
At Harvard.
At Harvard.
Yeah.
Okay, and now you're distinguished chairs of all sorts of things.
Right.
Including a National Academy of Education member and so forth. So what brought you here to UCLA?
My friend, my colleague, Marcelo Suarez Orozco was the dean. We had been at Harvard together. It turns out we were at Berkeley as grad students together. Then we're on the faculty at Harvard together. We were at NYU together, literally a couple doors away from each other, our offices. And so when he came as dean, shortly after, he recruited me to come. And I was ready. I have older kids who were living here in Los Angeles, and so it was attractive to be in sunny California and be close to my kids.
And somewhere around here you met your current wife, Dr. Allison Pimentel. Is that correct?
Right. So my first wife died in 2006 of cancer.
Okay.
Shortly after we moved back to New York City. I had 4 kids at the time. The youngest 2 were 11 and 13. I'd met my wife in Boston, but we became a couple about a year after my first wife passed, and we got married in 2011.
And now you have a family of 5, is that correct? 5 children?
5 children.
And 1 wife.
That's it.
Wonderful.